Hello, and welcome to another impromptu stream. Today, this should be a short one. I'm going to try to make it quick. This is going to be more of a complimentary video to our first stream that we did for setting up Git and Godot on Windows. But I'm going to look specifically at using GitHub Desktop today. So no Justin today, sorry, but this is just going to be a quick solo stream. So I'm going to pull up an agenda here just to make sure I cover everything to keep me on track. Yeah, we're going to look at installing GitHub Desktop, and we're going to then connect Git to a Godot project through GitHub Desktop. We're going to look at committing changes, and finally we will look a little bit at branches. So again, just kind of an equivalent of what we did a couple weeks back on the previous stream with the Git command line client, the Git bash program, but with GitHub Desktop this time. So without further ado, I suppose, I'm not used to not having the guest on here. I suppose I will switch over to my desktop here. This is my Windows computer, and like last time, I have not actually done any prep for the stream. I wanted to come in fresh. I've done the agenda, but not the actual prep on the computer. So we're going to open up my web browser. In my case, that's Firefox. We're going to specifically go to github.com, and I am logged in here with my account. So I'm not going to cover creating a new GitHub account. We're going to assume we have that set up from last time, but I am going to figure out where to get GitHub Desktop. So I think there's like a specific website you can go to, like desktop.github.com. But we're gonna see where we get it. Ah, here we go. No, GitHub website. Yeah. So yeah, when you're logged in and you go to github.com, you actually load like your feed here or your home, which then once you start following people, you'll have a feed, and it's like kind of like a little social network thing for GitHub specifically here. But yeah, if you ever want to get to like the GitHub website while you're signed in, it's here in the menu. Oh, and my face was covering it. It's in that top menu there. And let's see, product. There's all kinds of stuff here. Solutions, resources. Wow, very corporate. Also, not fitting on the screen. That's weird. Okay, well, I don't know where it is here. This is not as easy as it is to find. Yeah, they really want to sell me all kinds of AI stuff. Okay, we're gonna go to. Oops. We're gonna go desktop.github.com. Oh, which goes to github.com/apps/desktop, same thing. So we are going to download now. So again, yeah, that's desktop.github.com, or if you can find it on their website, you can go find it that way. And we're gonna download for Windows here. It is available for, I know at least for Linux, it's in the FlatHub App Store. And I think there's probably other versions, probably macOS as well, but we're on Windows, so we're gonna download Windows version here. And let that download. 162 megabytes. That is not a small app. Hopefully, looks like the audio, the music is a little high here. Let me bring that down just a bit. It's nice background music, but I don't want to compete with it. So this is usually when Justin would have a really good question to ask me, and I'm just going to sit here and stare at a loading screen. So sorry. Justin's helpful in that way. Yeah. We're going to assume that you're already set up with a GitHub account. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that on the GitHub website. And if you need help with that, we covered that in the previous stream that will be linked in the description. But it looks like we downloaded it. So we're going to open this up. And I can go ahead and just close my browser and wait for GitHub Desktop to open. Here we go. GitHub Desktop is being installed. It'll launch once it's done. And there we go. So we get this nice sign in here. You can create an account through GitHub Desktop if you haven't done it yet. I imagine it just takes you to a web browser, but we have already done that. So we're going to sign into github.com. Just going to pop us back out to our browser to sign in. And I'm going to sign in with my GitHub account here, and you have to authorize it. Basically, you're just saying, this is similar to when you signed in, if you've signed in the Git bash program. It's saying, hey, this program is going to be able to do stuff with my GitHub account on my desktop. without you like having to type my password every time. So you're authorizing it in advance here. And then you can type your password, or if you have a password manager, just remember it. Okay, and this is asking me, this is going to vary depending on your web browser. It does this in Firefox. I think it'll show something similar in like Edge and Chrome if you use one of those. It's saying, do you want to allow this site to open X GitHub desktop auth links with GitHub desktop? Yes. Basically, you're saying the GitHub website can like open up links in the desktop app, which is, yeah, you want that. Okay, and then here it's saying use your GitHub account name and email address or configure it manually. I'm going to leave it here. That's fine. Yep. Now it shows you what it'll look like. So this should look like your same account that you have on the desktop or on the GitHub website. We'll hit finish. Okay, there we go. It says let's get started. So by default here, you will have a list of your repositories or repos. I believe this is coming from your GitHub website. So this is going to be the same thing that's on your GitHub account on the web. But what you can also do is you can create a new repository on your local drive. So this would be the equivalent of doing like a git init, which we did in the previous video. Or you can also clone a repository from the internet. There's also this create a tutorial repository that can be handy if you have some time to step through that. Basically it will create a repository, push it to your GitHub account, and then that repository will kind of guide you through some Git things. So I haven't actually done this. I've seen it. I haven't gone through the actual tutorial, but I might as well try it out. So yeah, I created a repository here called desktop tutorial. I'm not sure. Let's see if it actually, if I go to github.com, let's see if it has actually already created it on the web. On my profile, or if I have to push for, oh yeah, it did. I just saw it there in the sidebar. Yeah, it says created one commit in one repository, Cassidy desktop tutorial. So that's cool. Just by clicking create a tutorial, it actually like talks to the GitHub website and creates that tutorial. So yeah, I encourage you, if you have some time, step through this little GitHub desktop tutorial. It's handy. It gives you something to start with right away without having to say like, oh, I need to create a Godot project or something. But yeah, so I'm not going to go through that tutorial right now. I am going to figure out how to switch back to that other screen. So we have current repository. I just want to like, if I just go back to the main screen. I guess I can't go back to the main screen now that I'm open here. That's interesting. Okay, that's fine. We can say filter or file, same options here. New repository, add a local repository, clone a repository. So in this case, I am going to do it kind of like what we did last time. We're going to say I want to make a Godot project. Last time I think we downloaded a file to create a new project. I'm just going to create a blank project here just because I think it's easier. We're going to call it GitHub desktop Godot test. It's going to put it in our documents folder. And it's going to create a folder called GitHub Desktop Godot Test. And now we're going to leave this version control metadata. This says Git. This is going to create some Git files in the folder. It's not going to initialize the repository, but it is going to put some stuff in there so that Git does things more correctly. Specifically, I think it puts the Git ignore file in there. So we're going to leave that selected to Git, and we're going to say create and edit. Now we have a Godot project. We have a blank canvas here. I'm going to create a really simple, node. I'm going to add a sprite, just so we have something to look at to prove that it worked. And I'm going to set the Godot icon as the sprite texture. I'm going to throw it about in the middle. I'm going to run it to make sure it works. And yeah, it's asking if I want to select the current scene as the default scene. Yeah, I said yes, and I can call this whatever I want. Could call this main, could call this game, could call this, just leave it node 2D. I call it main, and it runs our game. So we have a game, shows an icon. Great. And since I ran it, it saved it, but you can always hit Control S to make sure you save. I'm going to close this. So now I have a game, quote unquote game. Now we're going to open GitHub Desktop. And I have it pinned here on the taskbar. If you don't have it pinned, when it's open, you can just right click and say pin. And it's trying to load something from before. Let's ignore that. but we're going to go to, you can either go to File, New Repository, or if you click this current repository button here, there's also like an Add button, and you can say Create New Repository. Either way is fine. So we're going to create a new repository. Now this is, it's going to create the repository on your local computer. So this is like doing a git init, just like we did in the git bash tutorial a couple weeks back. So we're going to call this, and it's also, if you select a project that, if you select a folder for your repository that already has files in it, it will add those automatically. So we're going to use that same name. I copied it before. If you did not, then you can always go to your File Explorer, wherever you have your project stored. And pro tip, you can right click and hit rename and then copy it there, and it will copy just the name of the folder. And then you can paste that in here. So in the local path, you're just selecting the like parent folder that this is in, because you'll see at the bottom here it says, and I missed this when I was looking at this earlier. At the bottom here it says this repository, the repository will be created at, and then it gives you the path, and then it has that document slash and then the name of your project, GitHub Desktop Godot Test. So I'm giving it the name of this existing folder. It's a little confusing. It doesn't let you like actually select that folder. But yeah, that's something to look out for here. If you are starting in Godot, if you have an existing Godot project and then you want Git to know about it, yeah, make sure you do that correctly. And the description can be whatever. This will show up on the GitHub website. So I'm going to say just a test for a stream. Smiley face. And git ignore, we can ignore the git ignore thing because, again, I believe this is already set up by GitHub for us. Yes. So GitHub actually put Godot. This is already set up by Godot for us. When we selected that thing, or when we left it selected that said version control git, it automatically put these files into our project folder. And these are going to help Git know things like Git doesn't care about this whole folder called .godot. That's just like a bunch of local cache stuff that it shouldn't add to the repository. So yeah, we don't need to worry about choosing a git ignore here. That's already pre-selected or preset up by Godot. And license, I'm going to choose MIT license. That's kind of the standard in the Godot world if you're sharing your work openly. Godot itself is MIT licensed, and a lot of the like plugins, resources, and things are MIT licensed. If you don't select this or you leave it to none, that means your code is proprietary, and that means people can't copy it and bring it into their projects to learn from it. So in the spirit of sharing openly and helping other people learn, we really like the MIT license for that. Oh, and then the README. So there's a checkbox here. Sorry, I'm going to go in a weird order. Initialize this repository with a README. So there is a README file. If you're watching this stream live, sorry that I'm repeating a bunch, but I'm doing this so that it edits more nicely. When you look at a GitHub repository or any Git repository, it's a standard thing to have something called README in there. And the .md means it's a markdown folder or file, which is just a special way of writing text. So if I go here and edit this on the GitHub website just to show you, this is what the actual file contents looks like if you open this in like a code editor or a text editor. It's plain text. You know, it's easy to read without, it's not like HTML where there's a bunch of markup and stuff, but you can do some rich markup like, you can do, 2 asterisks to say bold, or single underline or underscores to say italics. If you've used like Discord's rich text formatting stuff, you probably are familiar with this. You can also do things like a link, which does like this, and then you go like this. For the sake of example. And so then I'm not going to save this, but I'll preview it to show you. So yeah, you got bold, italics, and links. So this is a nice way to have information about your project. And it's the convention that pretty much everybody does. If we go to Candy Wrapper, it's a good example actually. This is a project that we looked at last week. If you go to the Candy Wrapper project, you have this README here, and it has images, and it has the license information, it has all kinds of links and things in there. So it's the introduction to your repository for anybody who comes across it. So it's, yeah, if you don't already have one in your project, go ahead and check that box, and it will create a default one just with the name of the repo, but then you can always edit that file later. So we're going to select Create Repository. So now, we created this repository, and we created it for a folder that already existed. So what it actually will do here is, if you go to the History tab, it will GitHub Desktop, the GitHub Desktop app, automatically created something called the initial commit. So this is in the git bash or in the command line. When you type, git init, that's saying, hey, turn this folder into a Git project or Git repository. And then when you do git add dot, you're saying add all the files. And then you say git commit, you're saying, okay, here's my commit description. I'm committing all of these files to memory. Pay attention to these files. You're telling Git to keep track of these files. GitHub Desktop is smart. It automatically does that first initial commit if there's already files there, which is handy. So it added the git ignore file. It added the license file that we chose. It added the README file that it created. It added the icon and the main scene that we created and the main project file. So we now have a repository. Now, just like with the command line, you could just keep this local. You could just never push this to GitHub and publish. They call it publish. You can, because this hasn't been created on the GitHub side. If I go to GitHub and I go to my project or my repository, if I go to GitHub and I go to my profile, you won't see that repository here. There's nothing called GitHub desktop Godot test. So it's not here. If my computer blew up right now, all this stuff would be lost. Now, like we talked about a couple weeks back, this is still helpful. You can still use Godot, or you can use GitHub. You can still use Git locally on your computer and have some advantages without ever publishing your stuff. So you can do things like, it's keeping track of your work and you write commit messages to keep track of what you've done. You can also use it to switch into another branch to try something out without losing your old work or overwriting your old work. So you can still use this locally, as we did in that previous video. So I'm going to look at that now. Again, not even publishing this, just keeping it all local. So we had that Godot scene with the icon in the middle. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to switch branches here. I'm going to actually first, let's switch back to real quick to our agenda to make sure I'm doing these in the right order. So we installed GitHub Desktop, got that done. We connected Git to a Godot project. That's what we just did by creating a local repository. And now, we can commit changes. So it actually automatically did our initial commit for us. And we will look at using branches and committing changes in this next section real quick here. And then that'll be it. So let me switch back to the desktop here. So we have the main branch, which right now it has the history of just the initial commit. So it's a snapshot of my work when I created the repository. What I want to do now is, let's say I wanted to play around, but I don't want to lose that known good state of my game. I can create a new branch. So it says create a branch. Your new branch will be based on your currently checked out branch, which is main. That's the default that we had, which is the default branch. So we're going to call this, playground, I think is what we called it in the other one. So we're going to call it playground. So we've just created a branch, and that's it's branched off of the main one. So this work is going to exist in parallel, but it can be merged back into the main branch if we want, or we can just always leave it as a kind of a separate alternate history. If you're into like superheroes and multiverses, you can think of this as it's a multiverse here. You've gone through some portal into another universe, multiverse, but it can be merged back into the main one. So now it says up here, current branch playground, and we still have this initial commit here in the history because it was based on that previous branch. So that history stays here. But let's go make some changes. So I'm going to open Godot again. I'm going to open our project. And let's say in this version, I want the icon to be, massive, whatever. And we're going to save that. And we can play the scene here. Okay, great. That's our change. It's amazing. It's our playground. You can imagine this would be much more interesting if you were actually, switching out the asset, switching out the sprite, or if it was a real game where we had, logic. You could be testing. You could add a new level that's just a test because you just wanted to play with something, but you don't want to actually put it in your real game yet. You just want to play with this idea, and so that's where having a branch is really useful. So now that we have that branch, we can close Godot, and we'll see it automatically. The GitHub Desktop app shows changes. It says changes 1. And you look here, it gives you a nice preview. It even shows line by line, because under the hood, Godot engine is, it's writing all of the changes that you make in your project to a text file, because it's all text files under the hood. So it's saying, okay, we changed the position and we changed the scale from, the default scale of 1. It changed the scale to 4.11719. Nice round number. And this is just showing the changes, but we haven't actually committed this to memory. So if we went and changed these again, it wouldn't remember the different steps of the change along the way. It would just remember whatever final state we commit. So let's go ahead and commit this now. And you'll see in this bottom left side here, it says, it actually doesn't tell you. It says, please fill out this field. That's not helpful. This is what you call the commit message. And so we're going to say main, usually you like to preface it with what sort of thing you changed. And here it's the main scene, so we call it main. We could also call it sprite. Main, resize, or make sprite bigger. I don't know. Make sprite bigger. Then if you have more details like your why, so usually you want to keep this short and say like, this is the what. What did you do in one short little sentence? Well, you made the sprite bigger. And then if you want to put the why in here, this is, I want to test how the game feels with a bigger player character, whatever the reasoning behind it. So you have the what, and then you have the why. And then now when you hit this button, you will be committing. So you're saving this as a commit. You're saying, hey, git, commit this to memory. Remember that these changes happened. And now if you go to the history, you'll have the initial commit 7 minutes ago, and then you have your commit that you just made just now. So you can step through the history here. This is really helpful to see the whole history of your project. And as you keep committing things, as you keep changing things and committing things, you'll continue to see the history on this history tab. But again, we're in the current branch of Playground. So if we switch this now that we've committed that, if we switch it back to main, you'll see that history goes back to what it was before. It goes back just to that initial commit because we branched off of the main into Playground. So you can see how this can become really powerful for trying out ideas. And then in the future, you'll actually use this feature for collaborative game making. So you can actually be working together with more people, and each person can have their own branch, and that's a big part of the collaborative game making flow. But for now, it's nice just to see that it's helpful just for this kind of playing with an idea. Just to kind of drive this home, if we go back to main, it switches out. What it's actually doing, it's under the hood, it's changing all these files back to that state. So if we open the Godot engine again, and we go back to our project, you'll see now that we're on, I'm on the main branch. So now we have the small icon. If we play the game, we can see that. It's a small sprite there in the middle. And then if we close Godot engine, I always recommend you want to close Godot engine if you're going to be switching branches or doing anything in Git, just because if you change out the files underneath, out from under Godot can get a little confused by that and it can cause some issues. So we always save and close Godot engine itself and your project in Godot, and then do the Git stuff and then reopen Godot. But yeah, now if we switch back to that Playground and open Godot again, you will see, because it has changed out the files to the version that you've saved in this branch, you will see that we have the big sprite in the middle there that we resized. So yeah, you can use this as a playground to not worry about kind of like overwriting or corrupting your main branch. And then if you're ready, when you're ready, you can always merge things back into that main branch. If you've said, okay, this is in a state that I like, the feature is ready, or the bug is fixed, or whatever it is that you were doing in that separate branch, you can then merge it back in. I'm not going to show that right now. We'll cover that later, but that's the advantage of using branches. And again, all of this was without ever publishing to GitHub. This was all just on the local computer. You're using GitHub Desktop, the app, to use Git on your local computer. But these advantages exist without ever having to publish this or push it anywhere. Now, I am going to publish it because the advantages there are that it's basically a backup for your project too. And if you're going to have other people look at your project and if they want to fork it or make their own copy of it, you need to publish it somewhere. So I am going to go ahead and publish it. And it's going to confirm what you want the name to be on github.com and the description on github.com. And then it has to keep this code private. That's checked by default. That's going to be, that'll put it in a private repository. So it's a good backup for yourself, but nobody else will be able to see it. I'm going to uncheck that just because I want this to be open for anybody to see. And I'll hit publish. And now it's there. So I'm not going to get into like, there's all kinds of other stuff we could do, but the basics are that you can use the GitHub desktop app as your Git client and not have to use that terminal if you don't want. If you find this easier, some people do find that the terminal is faster and easier just because, you know, you can kind of get in the flow and type it. But I also know people, especially people who aren't working with code, if they're just working, like if they're a designer or sound designer working with just the like assets themselves, sometimes just the GitHub desktop app is all you need. Sometimes it's fine just to say, okay, I've got my project, I made my changes, I described those changes, and I committed them, and then I pushed them. So there's one thing I'll mention. So if you do have a project you're working on and it's pushed to GitHub, after you make a commit, there is a button, this fetch origin, this will change to say push changes. You do need to make sure you push those changes up for them to actually get to GitHub, the website. Otherwise, it'll just all stay on your local computer. So yeah, I think that wraps it up. It's 12:45. That was my goal for wrapping this up. So that's pretty good timing. To recap here, we installed GitHub Desktop on Windows. We connected Git to an existing Godot project. We learned how to commit changes, especially that initial commit, which GitHub Desktop did for us, and then a future commit. And we also looked a little bit at using branches. So yeah, I hope you learned something. Hopefully this is helpful. If the Git bash and the command line version of Git is a little bit intimidating for you, or you just prefer this more visual workflow, or if it just helps you understand how Git is working under the hood. Sometimes the visuals really help see what's going on. You don't have to type Git status and stuff as much. It'll show you to you more proactively. So hopefully this was helpful. Otherwise, yeah. Go check out previous streams on this playlist or in the link in the description, and that will have a lot more on this thread of using Git and Godot for game development. Thanks, and see you all next time.